If you asked anyone who played the 5Ds format back in early 2010 to name 2 Ice Barrier monsters, Trishula and Brionac would be the main monsters that come out of their mouths, as both these generic synchro monsters were mainstays in any deck that could make them. Sadly, what won't come out of their mouths are any other Ice Barrier monsters. While the Synchros saw abundant play, the rest of the cards saw binders and bins. Even when they gained more support in 2021, any chance of the deck being viable was utterly thawed out. So let's look at the Ice Barrier archetype and see what made this deck's chances run cold. Ice Barriers were introduced to the Yu-Gi-Oh world in Dual Terminal Arcade, but became more accessible to the public in the Hidden Arsenal series in 2009. Like many Hidden Arsenal archetypes, it did nothing on release, as many Hidden Arsenal archetypes just needed direction. The first main deck monsters didn't really make any impact. Blizz, Defender of the Ice Barrier, was a level 1 monster that needed to get destroyed by battle to let you draw a card. Chiromancer of the Ice Barrier was a level 2 tuner with a wonky effect that stopped level 4 or higher monsters from attacking if another Ice Barrier was on the field. While these two were highly disappointing ways to start the era of Ice Barriers, there would be one shining star that would begin the reign of Ice Barrier Synchros that would terrorize the game. This proved true when the TCG was shown Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barrier, a generic level 6 Synchro with 2300 attack and 1400 defense. It allows you to discard any number of cards from your hand to target the same number of cards in the field and bounce them back to the hand. Brionac was an absolute powerhouse back in 2010. You could use this effect more than once per turn and bounce back any card on the field, be it your opponent's or yours, as long as you had cards in your hand to discard. Brionac's effect made it easy to dismantle the boards and overcome significant threats. Not many boss monsters had protection either, making Brionac even more dangerous, as its generic level 6 made it easy to summon, and its effect got around the Synchro Titans such as Stardust Dragon and Colossal Fighter. You could even use it to reset cards you needed on your board, like continuous spells and traps. And it was used in soft loops that made boards filled with Synchro monsters if you see fit. It would be a staple in every Synchro deck, and one of the best go-to options whenever you needed to remove any obstacles in the field until it got banned in 2011. It would later be brought back at the TCG, safely nerfed and errated, with the effect being a hard once per turn, can only target your opponent's cards, and specifying that the effect does indeed target. The card doesn't really see any play today, as it's a former shell of itself. However, if anything proved to be a highlight for our friends from the Tundra, Brionac is one of the best printed. The next set to have Ice Barrier support was Gold Series 3, which gave them Numbing Grub of the Ice Barrier. This monster would make one of your opponent's monster zones unusable while it was on the field if it was normal summoned. It would also make itself unusable in the entire archetype and lived up to the name of Grub, as it was nothing more than food for your bulk pile. So already, the archetype had 3 unusable cards, and when the Shining Darkness introduced another card to the archetype, it ensured there was another unplayable card. Magic Triangle the Ice Barrier was the first spell card that made you reveal 3 Ice Barrier monsters from your hand to special summon an Ice Barrier monster from your deck. While cards that recruit monsters out of the deck are always strong, this one was just kind of mid, thanks to the archetype that it was played in. There was barely anything to summon off this archetype at the time, and even when more targets came out later for this card to summon, the requirements to use the card were too abysmal, as it required you to have 3 Ice Barrier monsters to reveal. The last thing anyone wants to use is a card that gives your opponent knowledge of what's in your hand and what you're playing, especially when your deck barely has any synergy. That statement remained true in Hidden Arsenal too, as the deck got several more monsters to play, or at least that was supposed to be the case. Sojo the Ice Barrier was a level 6 monster that changes to defense position when it's normal or flip summoned, and while it's on the field, spell or trap card effects can't destroy Ice Barrier monsters you control. Medium of the Ice Barrier was a level 7 monster that can be special summoned if your opponent controls 4 or more cards than you, and your opponent can only activate 1 spell or trap card while this card is face up on the field per turn. Pilgrim of the Ice Barrier was a level 4 that couldn't be destroyed by battle by monsters with 1900 or more attack. Finally, Geomancer of the Ice Barrier was a level 3 tuner monster, which lets you discard 1 card to declare an attribute, and that attribute can't target this monster for attacks. Nothing's worse than getting 4 new monsters and seeing that they were still kind of unplayable. Getting 2 high-level monsters alongside 2 low-level monsters with middle-lane facts and no cohesion or synergy is horrendous for any archetype. However, another Synchro was introduced to Ice Barriers, and once again, it was abused by everyone but Ice Barriers. Duloran, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier, was a level 6 Synchro that needed 1 tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner water monsters. You can return other face-up cards on your side of the field to the hand when it's summoned. Then, this card gains 500 attack for each card returned to your hand until the end of the turn. While it doesn't seem as strong as Brionac, it was just as dangerous as Brionac, as it allowed players to loop back cards and resources to the hand, which amusingly meant another Ice Barrier Synchro could do FTKs or loops. Duloran was mainly known for an FTK involving Symbol of Heritage, and everyone's favorite FTK involved Synchro, Power Tool Dragon. The only saving grace of this card, not being completely busted, was it needing non-tuner water monsters as materials, and that most of the loops it was in were kind of inconsistent. That didn't stop Konami from trying to keep the peace, and they semi-limited Duelloran to 2 in 2009. It would proceed to have on and off visitations on the list, being put back to 3 in 2011, right back to 1 in 2013, then bouncing between limited and semi-limited, before being placed at 3 with an errata to make its effect a hard once per turn. Nonetheless, errata or not, that didn't change the fact that the Ice Barriers couldn't use this card effectively. It's not like they were any effective as a deck anyway. Plugging random monsters with effects into a deck with no direction is a formula for failure, as the deck figured out. There still needed to be a way to bring the archetype together, as it needed more starter monsters or solid extenders. Starstruck Blast did give it another good piece of support through the heaps of trash that came in there. Medallion of the Ice Barrier was their newest spell card, which simply added an Ice Barrier monster from your deck to your hand. Like that, Ice Barriers had a card that most hidden Arsenal archetypes wish they had. A simple Searcher was like water in a desert, yet Ice Barrier was lucky to get it. It would be a shame if there was nothing good to search for though. Royal Knight of the Ice Barrier was a level 5 monster that when tribute summoned, special summoned an Ice Coffin token to your opponent's side of the field, and that token can be tributed for a tribute summon. Dance Princess of the Ice Barrier was level 4, which could allow you to reveal a number of Ice Barrier monsters in your hand to bounce that many of your opponent's spells and traps to their hand once per turn. And finally, Mirror of the Ice Barrier was a quick play spell that came with multiple effects each time an opponent's activated monster effect would banish a card from your hand, deck, or graveyard for turn. If from your hand, you rip 2 random cards from your opponent's hand. If field, you banish 2 cards your opponent controls. And if graveyard, you banish 2 cards from their graveyard. As you might have expected, the support went through the same old song and dance as all the others. Royal Knight was another terrible monster that needed to be tribute summoned in an already slow deck. Dance Princess was actually a reasonably decent card, but offered nothing else but removal. And Mirror was too conditional of a card, needing your opponent to banish something for it to be alive. Surprisingly, it was shortly seen as a counter to Necroz, when this card was used to combat the Necroz of Trishula during its short stay as a side deck card of the meta. That's the best highlight you can get from this latest support. A searcher with nothing good to search, and Trishula's one true weakness, a mirror. This wouldn't be the end of Trishula's support, as the main stars continue to get more support in Hidden Arsenal 3. 7 new monsters came to the aid of the Ice Barriers, including another Synchro monster. Samurai of the Ice Barrier was a level 4 monster that, when changed from attack position to defense position, lets you destroy it to draw 1 card. Shock Troops of the Ice Barrier was level 3 that allowed you to tribute it to destroy 1 face-up water monster in the field, then add an Ice Barrier monster from your deck to your hand. Dewdark was a level 2 tuner that could attack directly if all you controlled were face-up monsters that were level 2 or lower. Spellbreaker was level 4 that lets you send an Ice Barrier monster from your hand to the graveyard once per turn to stop both players from activating spell cards until the end of your next turn while this card is face-up on the field. Caravan of the Ice Barrier was level 1 that could return 2 Ice Barrier monsters from your graveyard to your deck in order to make both players draw 1 card. General Gunnard was level 8, where during your main phase you could normal summon 1 Ice Barrier monster in addition to your normal summoner set once per turn. Their newest extra condition was Gungear Dragon of the Ice Barrier, a level 7 synchro monster with 2500 attack and 1700 defense, which needs a tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner water monsters to make. Once per turn, you can discard up to 2 cards to select the same amount of cards your opponent controls and destroy them. Gungear is considered the weakest of all the Ice Barrier synchros. This card was given a limit on how much you could pop, and Konami made sure not to make the same mistakes they made with Brionac and Duelloran by giving Gungear an effect that destroys instead of returning cards to the hand, limiting any chances for this card to do any kind of loops. So there's no need for the Yu-Gi-Oh community to deal with another FTK from the hands of the Ice Barriers. What they needed to worry about was this deck still being cold garbage. Even with the continuous support, the deck still had no synergy, playstyle, or direction. It seemed at this point Konami was just printing monsters with effects just for the sake of it, and not considering that the deck had too many issues needing to be addressed. This tragedy doesn't get fixed until the next set either. That's even with stating that Hidden Arsenal 4 gave Ice Barriers one of the most dangerous synchros of the 5D era. Hidden Arsenals 4 came out in the TCG on April 9th, 2011, and players couldn't wait to open packs and pull the hype of the format, Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This level 9 synchro took a 1 tuner plus 2 or more non-tuners to make. When synchro summoned, it allows you to banish 1 card in your opponent's field, hand, and graveyard. At the peak of the 5D's format, Trishula was one of the top synchros in the TCG. Having an effect that does not target and is non-destructive removal in 3 different places was devastating in most games. It was even more devastating when you summoned it on your opponent's turn. You see, back in 2011, Formula Synchron was heavily ran in heavy synchro-style decks like TG and Plants, who would make boards with enough material that when their turn rolled around, they would use Formula Synchron's effect to synchro summon Trishula and interrupt their combo plays, and then play through cards that would usually be able to stop Trishula like Effect Veiler. A play like this was able to end your opponent's turn back in the old formats. Also, if it didn't shock you enough already, this card was involved in loops, and decks like Infernity could continuously loop it back to the extra deck to replay it until your opponent was left with nothing left in their starting hand. So you can guess where Trishula went for the majority of its lifespan. Right on the ban list with its kin in 2012 until it was eventually limited in 2013, semi-limited in 2019, and given its release papers in 2020, where the card sees no play due to how fast and evolved the current Yu-Gi-Oh! Is today. If only the support back then evolved just as fast. Defender the Ice Barrier is a level 3 tuner that stops your opponent from declaring attacks with monsters with an attack equal to or greater than this card's defense while you control an Ice Barrier monster. Warlock of the Ice Bear is a level 3 monster that makes both players set spell cards before activating them, and then you can't activate them until the next turn. Sacred Spirit of the Ice Bear was a level 4 spirit monster. Like a spirit monster, it can't be special summoned and returns to the hand during the end phase. However, if you control another Ice Bear monster, its end phase effect becomes target one monster your opponent controls and return it to the hand. General Raiho of the Ice Bear was level 6 that makes your opponent discard one card of their choice to activate their monster effects, or else it's negated. Strategist of the Ice Bear is level 4 that lets you send one Ice Bear monster from your hand to the graveyard to draw one card once per turn. Secret Guards of the Ice Bear is level 2 that protected your Ice Bear monsters from being targeted by your opponent's monster effects. Finally, General Gantala of the Ice Bear was level 7 that targets an Ice Bear monster in your graveyard, except another copy of itself, and special summons it during the end phase. If Hidden Arsenal is recognized for having most of the failed archetypes, this is a significant reason why. Throughout 7 sets, the archetype received the most support and still wasn't, or if barely, playable. It was a slow, bricky deck, even with a built-in search card piled with random monsters littered with random effects that didn't even gel correctly with strong Synchro boss monsters, let alone with each other. It proves that just giving an archetype support after support after support doesn't justify its playability. After yet another case of playable Synchros and unplayable monsters, Ice Bears were pushed to the wayside until new support came out in the TCG set Photon Shockwave in 2015. Prior of the Ice Bear was a level 2 monster with 1000 attack and 400 defense. It can be special summoned from your hand if you control another Ice Barrier monster, but you can't special summon level 5 or higher monsters if it's summoned this way. You contribute this card to target an Ice Barrier monster in your graveyard and special summon it. For some reason, they thought giving an extender in a Synchro deck a restriction to not allow you to use your Synchro monsters when it was brought out was a good idea. While this card was horrendous to play an Ice Barrier, believe it or not, this mediocre card did see play in the meta. While this card is clearly allergic to Synchro decks, the card flourished as an extender in the Xyz era, giving the deck access to monsters like Totally Awesome, or using his effect for spamming out level 4 Ice Barrier monsters to make Bahamut Shark, who got you a Totally Awesome too. It even saw more use later in the Link era as an extender playing the same role. So basically, you were trading in dragons to play a frog and blue cards, which was better than the option of not having a playable deck at all. Prior gave Ice Barrier its first decent playstyle to moderate success. However, this playstyle could only be decent for so long as formats and more powerful decks emerged. So Konami returned to the basics, to make Ice Barrier Synchros again. The campaign was in full bloom as Konami announced the release of Structure Deck Freezing Chains in 2021. The Structure Deck improved the deck's ability to get Ice Barrier monsters on the field so they could perform Synchro summoning more consistently. 5 new monsters alongside 2 new spell cards finally gave Hidden Arsenal stars a chance to see play. Revealer the Ice Bear was a level 4 spellcaster that prevented your opponent from tribute summoning while you controlled an Ice Barrier monster. It also lets you discard 1 card from your hand to special summon an Ice Barrier from your deck, but it would be locked into special summoning water monsters for the rest of the turn. If you discard a card or send cards from your hand to the graveyard for an Ice Barrier monster's effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. Speaker was a level 4 spellcaster that prevented your opponent's defense position monsters from switching position while you control another Ice Barrier monster, and once per turn allowed you to special summon this card from your hand if you control another Ice Barrier. If this card was in the graveyard and you controlled an Ice Barrier, you can banish it to special summon a level 1 Ice Barrier token. General Wayne was a level 5 warrior that banished any spell traps that your opponent used on the field. If your opponent controlled a monster and you controlled an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this monster from your hand. And if it's normal or special, you can add an Ice Barrier spell trap from your deck to your hand. Hexa was a level 1 tuner that drops your opponent's monster's attack and defense by 500 while you control another Ice Barrier. Once per turn, you can send a level 3 or lower Ice Barrier monster from your deck to the graveyard to increase this card's level by that amount until the end of the turn. Finally, Zuijin was a level 2 warrior that you contribute to special summon a level 5 or higher Ice Barrier monster from your hand. If this card is in your graveyard, except the turn of Ascent there, you can target a level 3 or higher water monster you control, reduce its level by 2, and special summon this card from the graveyard, but banish it when it's removed from the field. If you couldn't tell by the effects, these cards were way better than their previous counterparts. Revealer was the starter the deck needed, special summoning monsters from the deck for your plays, while cards like Speaker, Wayne, and Hexa were extenders, supplying extra resources for your plays. They even had bonus floodgate effects while they were on the field. All of this was supposed to be used to bring out their newest boss monster, Trishula, Zero Dragon of the Ice Barrier, which is a level 11 synchro monster that takes 1 tuner plus 2 or more non-tuners. When this card synchro summon, you can banish up to 3 cards your opponent controls. If an opponent's card destroys this synchro summon monster, you can special summon the original Trishula from your extra deck or graveyard, make its attack 3300, have the attack of all your opponent's monsters, then negate their effects. Okay, not everything could be a home run. While the banishing effect was decent, the card was terribly underwhelming. The card depended on your opponent to destroy it during a time where there were multiple ways to remove a card from the field that didn't involve destruction effects. The biggest grievance is that it brings out Trishula, but doesn't treat the summon as a synchro summon, giving you only a 3300 attack beat stick. And only the monsters on the field currently are negated. It also wasn't as if the old Ice Barrier synchros were any improvements, since they've been either outdated or received an errata by then. For spells, Freezing Chains of the Ice Barrier was a continuous spell that lets you target one level 4 Ice Barrier monster from your graveyard and special summon it when activated. If you control 3 more Ice Barrier monsters you control are unaffected by the effects of your opponent's monsters special summon from the extra deck. Wins over the Ice Barrier allowed you to tribute any number of Ice Barrier monsters you control to special summon level 4 or lower Ice Barrier monsters from your deck equal to the number of monsters you tributed. During the main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish it to add an Ice Barrier monster from your graveyard or that's banished to your hand. Freezing Chains and Winds were both automatic staples in the deck. Freezing Chain gives you extra extension protection for your monsters, while Winds can fix your board and add flexibility to your plays. So, with all of these tools at their disposal, did Ice Barrier go anywhere? Of course they didn't. We wouldn't have this video if they did something. While they gained a starter, they're highly dependent on having monsters on the field, making them highly reliant on board presence since most of their cards depend on them having an Ice Barrier on the field. Cards like Gozen Match, Nibiru, and Summon Limit pretty much shut the deck down and make it challenging to set a strong board. Also, this deck is weak against banishment, which can completely mess up the graveyard effects from your monsters or any cards that can recur resources like Freezing Chains. Also, the deck performed poorly against established boards when going second and had difficulty breaking your opponent's established boards. So the deck was now playable, but didn't stand a good chance against the meta and was seen as a fun deck to play. The final card currently in the TCG for Ice Barriers came in Lightning Overdrive in 2022. The Judge of the Ice Barrier was a level 4 warrior that punished your opponent every time they activated a card or effect that made them pay life points by making them lose 500 more life points, if you control another Ice Barrier monster. Once per turn, you can target 1 or 2 Ice Barrier monsters in your graveyard, alongside 1 or 2 monsters in your opponent's graveyard, and shuffle them into the deck. You can also banish this card from your graveyard if you control an Ice Barrier to change a face-up attack position monster to defense position. Furthermore, you can never play this card, as its floodgate effect is situational. Its ignition effect on the field and graveyard barely hinders your opponent, so it doesn't contribute as an extender or a starter. The card doesn't give any advantage of its use, and it's best avoided in any build of Ice Barrier. Now, at this point in the video, we usually would just laugh at these cards and call it a day. However, we must hold back our chuckles because the archetype was given hope on the horizon. In 2023, Terminal World was released in Japan, revealing 4 new Ice Barrier cards that further boost the power of the deck. Mirror Magic Master of the Ice Barrier is a level 2 tuner that lets you tribute 1 other effect monster to special summon up to 3 level 1 Ice Barrier tokens to your side of the field, and increases cards level by the same number. Still, you're locked into special summoning water synchro monsters from your extra deck. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add an Ice Barrier monster that's banished or from your deck to your hand. Georgius, Swordmaster of the Ice Barrier, is a level 5 warrior monster that prevents your opponent from activating monster effects in the graveyard while you control an Ice Barrier monster. Once per turn, if you control another Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this monster from your hand, and if this card is no more specialed, you can special summon a level 5 or lower Ice Barrier monster from your hand or graveyard. Frozen Domain, leading to the Ice Barrier, was a new continuous trap card that prevented your opponent from activating cards or effects in response to the activation of your Ice Barrier monster effects. If any monsters are special summoned from your extra deck, you can return an Ice Barrier monster you control to the hand or deck to place 1 card in the field or in the graveyard on the bottom of the deck once per turn. This card also has a maintenance cost, needing you to reveal 3 Ice Barrier monsters with different names in your extra deck, or it's destroyed during the end phase. To wrap up this soon-to-be TCG cards, Lancia, Dragonic Ancestor of the Ice Spirit Mountain, is a level 10 synchro needing 1 water tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. Once per chain, if your opponent special summons a monster, you can special summon 1 Ice Barrier monster from your hand, deck, extra deck, or graveyard. Then you can change 1 opponent's attack position monster to defense position. This effect can be used twice per turn, surprisingly enough. If this face-up synchro summon card in its owner's control leaves the field by an opponent's card, you can special summon 1 Ice Barrier synchro monster from your extra deck, and the summon is treated as a proper synchro summon. Lancia is the boss monster that Ice Barrier players have downright prayed for since the release of the structure deck. The card allows Ice Barriers to have more assertive turn 1 boss monsters that can interact with your opponent's plays. At the same time, it gives you access to any Ice Barrier monster you need for free from anywhere when your opponent plays monsters, regardless of the level or the attack or defense power of the Ice Barrier monster you want. You can get anything from General Raiho or Medium to set up strong floodgates into your opponent's plays. This hilariously overpowered effect is also followed by the fact that removing this card can lead to a free live Ice Barrier Synchro monster. Not only did they receive a fantastic boss monster, but they also received outstanding main deck support. Yugioh was not only an extender, but fetched you an extra resource from your hand or graveyard, and boasted a potent floodgate effect that prevents your opponent from activating monster effects in the grave. With almost every recent Yu-Gi-Oh monster having some sort of effect that activates when sent to the graveyard, Yugioh would be a powerful card used during your end board. Mirror Judge was effectively a 1-card extra deck summon, and a useful recycle for getting your resources, and Frozen Domain was a decent trap that can spin back any nuisances on the board while protecting your Ice Barrier monsters from being responded to, though the maintenance costs might deter players from playing the card. This support can push this deck into seeing some meta play, as these cards help build a better board, give the interaction this deck desperately needs, and most of all, give it a solid playstyle that can compete. Now that that's out of the way, back to laughing at them. Though the new support can give them some hope, the current Ice Barrier archetype is one of history's biggest busts. Not only was this archetype pushed to the forefront of the Hidden Arsenal campaign, but they were also given some of the worst, if not dominant, synchros to be printed in the entire game, and still went nowhere for years. The deck literally played like a block of ice, and it had no synergy from the main deck to the extra deck, no cohesion, no good starters, and no extensions. By the time they got the support they needed, way back in 2011, it was already too late. The playstyle was just spam out monsters, was easy to interrupt, and offered no interaction with your opponent's turn outside of measly floodgate effects, while being weak against floodgate effects. It's tough to defend most archetypes out of Hidden Arsenal because most of them were treated the same as Ice Barriers by being the worst things in Yu-Gi-Oh! A bunch of cards with effects on them. Ice Barriers deserve a cold shoulder as it's put into the Yu-Gi-Oh! Hall of Fail. And thanks for watching. Are there any other decks that belong on the failed cards and mechanics? Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.